Okay, in this flip video, we're going to talk about the failures of the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, which created, as we've talked about, a confederation. And again, a confederation is a group of loose states that work together on common goals on like big things like going to war or maybe a big trade deal or something. But we're going to find out that might not even be the case in our Articles of Confederation. And we're going to find out why did it fall apart. It didn't just fall apart, it fell apart very quickly. It only basically kept us together just enough, and we luckily, I would argue, won the Revolutionary War, and a lot of it was because of George Washington's leadership in unifying the country, and some of the founding fathers willing to like sacrifice and work together to keep us together. But it was very close for this new experiment called the United Nations or United States of America to actually make it, but it did. So let's look at this, and we're going to get going into. Now, you guys are going to do a jigsaw in class. We're not going to talk about that now. So you're going to have to actually read through these articles in pairs and groups and try to teach us in a jigsaw. Now, the Articles of Confederation, as I said, was created in 1781. It's the first Constitution of the United States. It gave states more power than the central government, and this caused many leadership difficulties. That's why it's called a confederation. Confederate states. There's really only two confederacies that worldwide we're really known well, and that's the United States started as a confederation, and then the South, in a move to actually break off from the United States, and which is really considered treason by many, formed a confederation. It's probably one of the main reasons that the South lost the Civil War is because while militarily they probably had better generals and they had men that were better at understanding the terrain and fighting. Luckily for the North, they couldn't work together, and the resources like uniforms and guns and weapons and food never went to the right places because everybody's only taking care of their state soldiers as opposed to working unified. So you think about a war. When you fight a war, you need the country or the nation to actually unify together and spending resources, and that's one of the biggest problems we had with this. And you could see this join or die, this idea in the left corner of like America was these separate parts that came together to form this one nation. But originally it was only for the war was the main idea or big trade deals, big ideas. So I want you to think about the fact that, remember, our original motto in the United States, although it was unofficial, was E pluribus unum, out of many one, meaning all states have to come together to form one nation. Now, the Articles of Confederation failed. We're going to look at why. And it failed very quickly. It had to be replaced by what we use today called the U.S. Constitution. The states didn't act immediately, and these are very important points we need to know for class and for quizzes and tests and all year. The states did not act immediately. It took until February 1779 for 12 states to approve the document. It was very slow in the process of actually getting anything done. It's not very efficient itself. States would go back to the state, and remember back then there was no Instagram or there was no social media or TikTok, or which may be gone now. It was all about going back and forth and communications, and we're going to find out that you had to have the document itself had to be approved by all states to actually get it done. So that in itself was a challenge. Two, the central government was designed to be very, very weak. The Articles established that the United States of America was a perpetual union formed to defend the states as a group. So when it came down to it, what were we really going to come together on? War. And that was really the main idea. There was war. And there's actually no executive branch as we know it today. There was no president in the Articles of Confederation. So if you imagine, really, we were really throwing George Washington as the general or commander-in-chief, the commander of the military, to just deal with all of this. But there was no actual president of the United States or executive branch to get the armies together. It was all in the generals. The Articles of Confederation only had one chamber, and each state had one vote. So the way it worked is you had 13 colonies, and this is very similar to the United Nations today. Every colony in the Confederacy had one vote. And this is kind of upsetting especially to the larger states, because Virginia, which was the most populated state, got one vote, while you think Delaware, who had very small amount of people, got one vote, received one vote. That is equal power in the actual voting on things, and that caused a lot of conflict, and that the Founding Fathers are going to have to resolve that idea. This is unbelievable. Congress needed 9 out of 13 states to pass any laws. Wow. That is almost 3/4 of the states to pass anything, any kind of law. So it's almost impossible. If you think about that in American history, it's 2/3 of the House of Reps and the Senate, and the president has, or House of Reps and the Senate, I'm sorry, to actually amend the Constitution. You need 2/3. That has only happened 27 times, and 10 of them actually happened immediately. The Bill of Rights happened almost immediately within 2 years of the Constitution, and that was just adding that into, and we'll find out why. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists had to work this out, and they did, and they created a Bill of Rights as a compromise. So you have to understand this is super hard to pass legislation or laws. Today, you just need a majority in the House of Representatives and a majority in the Senate, and the president signs it off into law. There was no president, so they didn't have to deal with that. But think of how many laws are passed today. Not many. Laws generally aren't passed. Not that many laws are actually passed at all. And it was still, our nation was built on this idea of not passing things too quick. But 9 out of 13 made it virtually impossible. It just was not doable. The document was practically impossible to amend. The articles, if you would actually amend the Articles of Confederation, this is insane. You would have to have, you ready for this? All 13 states would need to agree on the change. All 13 states. Now, I don't know if you've gotten 100% of anybody to do anything, but it's not happening. I mean, you think in my classroom, if I want to do like a review session and I try to find one time, and there's only 20 of us to meet and review, how hard it is to find a perfect time. And it doesn't happen. Even then, there's somebody that can't make it that day, or they got something going on, which is understandable, or they don't like that time. We don't agree on everything unanimously, like all the time. There's always going to be somebody that stands up and has a different point of view. And especially, you think of politicians and people in leadership, they have very strong points of view on things. They're not going to just agree on things. So what you have to understand is, it's just, there's no way this could work. And the Founding Fathers very quickly saw that this was not working. 6, the central government couldn't collect taxes to fund its operations. Wow. So the whole point of the Articles of Confederation is the states would come together to actually work together against the war, but they couldn't fund. They literally had problems funding the U.S. military and George Washington in the Revolutionary War. It was a mess. And then when the war was over, they owed money. They had borrowed money, and they couldn't collect taxes to pay for it. Very inefficient and essentially self-destructive. Like, the nation was going to collapse on itself if they can't pay for anything. Nobody's going to lend the United States money if they can't borrow They can't borrow money, or they can't pay back their debt. And that's why even today we have all this debt, but at the same time, people trust the American government and the people to pay back the debt, even if it's as much money as the whole country is worth right now. But there's still this belief that we're going to pay back the actual debt. Back then, people weren't so sure you're going to pay them back the debt. Remember, this is a new experiment, the United States. We don't know if it's even going to make it. So why would we be lending them money or are counting on them if they can't raise taxes and they can't collect money? So this is a huge issue to think about. So let's keep looking on. And also, you have to understand, under a confederacy, who creates the money? It's not a federal or centralized government. And it's not unitary, as we talked about before, where the money is top down and goes out to the states. It's the states. It's a confederacy. So Virginia had Virginia dollars, and then New York had New York money, and you're trying to take your Virginia bones and spend them over in New York, and it's not working. Guys, it's a hot mess. Because when you try to spend your money, there's arguments on what money is worth what. So is it 15 Virginia dollars to 2 New York dollars? And who gets a cut on transitioning this money? And that was actually when I was in Europe many years ago, before the EU was a big problem. You go to Italy and I would get 1,600 lira to the dollar, but then I go to Greece and I get 350 drachma, and you're constantly converting money, which was very expensive because I would lose money every time I'd bring different types of money. Does that make sense? And the rates would change all the time. And one of the reasons the EU exists is to have a euro, one standardized money or coinage system, so that we don't have to sit there and goof around on doing exchanges all day, which is impractical. Well, this wasn't just impractical, it caused literal disruption of trade and confusion and loans. Like, I can't lend somebody money in New York because I don't even know how much money it'd be worth. So that's just not worth it. It was causing economic issues as well in the United States. Now, Shays' Rebellion is what's coming up, and we're going to find out what that is. The states are unable to conduct their own foreign policies. Whoa. They could actually conduct their own foreign policies. So maybe they'd have to get together and agree on one big deal, but this is where it gets really insane. Virginia can be trading with England, meanwhile New York is trading with France. They're working as their own sovereign states, and we've used the term sovereign, independent states, and they just come together for war reasons, or if there's a challenge by another country. That's insane. You have states competing with each other and undermining each other to work with France or Britain or some of the huge economies. You could kind of see how this plays out in St. Louis. St. Louis has municipalities, and in some ways that causes a lot of disruption in economics, because Clayton gets tax revenue from businesses coming there, and they'll give a tax break to a company to build their skyscraper there, or St. Louis City, and then another municipality like Brentwood or Ferguson will say, whoa, if you build here, we'll give you no tax. You don't have to pay any taxes for 10 years. And we call these tax abatements. And what happens is essentially everybody loses out because nobody gets the tax revenue because there's so much competition when, let's be blunt, the building had to be built anyway. So there was going to be a new Starbucks or a new Target or a new Costco or Walmart somewhere. And yes, maybe they would have got some kind of tax break to bring it within a regional area, but Walmart didn't just pick St. Louis County for any reason. There's a demand there, and they want to put their product. So we could have had more revenue for the county and the government if we would have worked together, as opposed to creating this unhealthy competition that undercuts our own tax revenue to support our own citizens. Very similar here. The states are competing with each other to the point that these other nations are really benefiting, and also they're losing out on money. States had their own money, we talked about that, and that was just absolute chaos. They're printing their own money, and you had to decide what's worth what, who's the most valuable money, and who has the least valuable money. Was it Georgia had started out as a penal colony for prisoners, or was it Delaware, who hardly anybody lives in the state? I don't know. You'd have to judge these things, and a lot of it would be on speculation. There's no real value to it. It's just, I don't think Delaware money's worth as much. Well, not that many people use it, kind of stuff. Now, the Confederate government couldn't help settle Revolutionary War era debts. This is another big problem we just talked about. We owed a lot of money. The Revolutionary War was not cheap. War is not cheap. It might be a lot more convenient today, as we've talked about in the past, like the war in Afghanistan. I'm not sure anybody even notices it's really going on anymore. You get a little snippet on the news here or there about maybe there were some American soldiers that were hurt or died in combat, but it's almost as we've forgotten the war. Very convenient. However, back then, not only was war not convenient, and people knew people that died in the war, it was also incredibly expensive, and it had to be paid back. We still have to pay back these wars on terror we fought for the last 20 years, and we ran up the debt, but it's a lot more convenient today because we work together in a federal system where a centralized government can borrow money. Back then, they couldn't borrow money unless it was agreed upon, and it wasn't happening. And if your debts aren't paid back, nobody trusts you. They don't want your debt. Now, finally, the straw that breaks the camel's back is Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is it. Shays' Rebellion scares the bejesus out of people. It's a tax protest in Western Massachusetts where farmers in 1786, 1787 showed the central government could put down an internal rebellion. Farmers that had fought in this war were ready to arm themselves and fight to get paid, Because remember, on 9, they couldn't settle their debt. So a lot of soldiers didn't have any money to actually, didn't actually get paid for the Revolutionary War. And a lot of people don't know this, but George Washington himself had to deal with, he had an insurrection within the colonial army, and they were ready to possibly kill him and overthrow and take over the colonial army during the Revolutionary War because they weren't getting paid or fed or uniforms. And he had to basically keep it all together without the support of a federal central government's money. Instead, he had a confederacy that was maybe giving him something here or there. So we're going to